dafür da, dass wir aus den Fehlern lernen. Aber genau das passiert doch wieder. Hunderte von Klimaaktivisten wurden verhaftet, weil sie für unsere Welt kämpfen, für das Gute, für unsere Zukunft und auch für deine.
Germany is doing enough as a whole to prevent climate change? No. Not at all. That could be the... No. Do you think young people are doing enough? Yeah, I think we are doing pretty much everything we can, so yeah. But of course not everyone. Like, we are, but not every young student. So. Who do you think is the most responsible for climate change? Well, big countries like Germany and the USA and Canada.
Man hat sich auch verpflichtet, Pariser Klimaabkommen möglichst die Erderwärmung bei 1,5 Grad zu begrenzen. Und mit dem, was Deutschland momentan so plant, kann man es ja nicht, also wird ja Deutschland das verfehlen. Von daher ist sozusagen das Mindeste, dass wenigstens das, was die Regierung...
Why do you strike? Yeah, I think it's important to make a change and not just like sit at home and do nothing. Because I know many people who just think about and talk about the change or changing something, but not actually doing something. So that's why I'm here. I think it's the same, and because climate change is like a very pressing issue because it affects our future, and I don't want anyone to take it away. I think it's important because it's good to get media attention, and then, well, when it's in the media, everyone will notice about it. I think you can try to produce less waste and go striking and stuff like that.
Wenn irgendwas keinen Sinn ergibt, kann man die Kausalkette bis zur Lobby zurückführen. Da ist dann der Punkt, der einfach nicht logisch ist und wo die Antwort dann wiederum Geld ist. Oder wäre halt, dass man nicht unbedingt alles jetzt von 100 auf 0 runterschrauben muss. Wenn jeder schon von 100 auf 50 runterschrauben würde, also nur 50% von dem machen würde, was die Hälfte an Fleisch essen würde, nur halb so oft fliegen würde, nur halb so oft mit dem Auto fahren würde, wäre es schon mal ein deutlicher Schritt, weil alles dann halbiert wäre, ohne dass man sich denkt so, aber ich kann ja nicht komplett ohne leben.
I think probably from the 80s through to 2010, maybe just before, things were going quite well, and when you're reading about climate change, there are quite a lot of times when you're reading credit schemes and various other measures to get industry and get countries talking about carbon reduction. You read that the UK was very instrumental in setting up these schemes, and then the US scientific community are some of the best in the world at researching climate change. So yeah, we have historically, I think in the last couple of years, in both the UK and America, it's kind of been forgotten about a lot, or you have kind of conservative government and you have Trump kind of trying to deny it, or at least downplay it as much as possible. Because if you look at the recent elections, or the upcoming elections, every single party apart from the Conservative Party are pretty actively discussing it as in their manifesto, whereas Conservative Party are kind of talking about it because it looks like they need to, because people want them to say stuff about it, but they don't really seem that engaging. Participation.
Okay.
Local events. Extinction Rebellion is good because it's managed to get a lot of people involved. Not good because it has, people are quite dubious about the way the decisions are made, about how the inclusion of different peoples, but overall it's done a very good job of making the world press. And then I think locally, talking to MPs, probably the most important is talking to friends and family. because if you can talk to the MP, that's one person talking to an MP. If you can talk to all of your friends and family and get them interested and involved, then that's potentially all of them talking to an MP and talking to friends and family. And if that can be done in a way that doesn't seem doom and gloom, but is kind of laying out just sensibly what the scenario is, then that's pretty useful. And then voting. Yeah, voting in such a way that you're not supporting a party that isn't interested in climate change. And then I guess the other two I had thought about are the lifestyle and reading. Reading kind of goes into talking to friends and family, because if you understand the problem well, you can talk about it interestingly, and it's just good to understand it properly so that you don't end up doing things like the paper straw, where paper straws were good because they raised awareness, but I think people thinking that using paper straws is a solution. It's not a solution. It should be like one tiny step, but people seem to see it as this big breakthrough. So understanding where those successes are really successful and how they should be viewed. And then the other thing is like lifestyle, which is food, eating less meat, recycling, preparing for change, and then also looking for maybe understanding how impactful flights are is quite a good one. The government knowing that people are interested, and then it has to be like systematic, the change. So I think understanding what changes are needed by government through reading is probably the most useful lifestyle change.
One more chance to keep you satisfied. You are always on my mind. You are always on my mind.
To other countries.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite annoying. So I think after especially going through uni and learning what I learned, the UK compared to other countries doesn't do enough, especially in the position we're in. So we're in the service sector, so we don't really have production at the level of say like China, the USA, but that's a little bit different. But like Indonesia, Thailand. So for us to be in the position we're in financially, education-wise, kind of understanding what's going on, it does not nearly enough of the capacity that we have. So it's quite frustrating for someone who studied it and understands, and you kind of go, well, there's little things that we can do. It's not as good as say, kind of like, even China are really investing in it heavily, it isn't as good as other countries that are in a similar position to us. So me personally, so there's been a bit of debate, especially with my course on it, and I think a lot of people argue this is the wrong way about it, but I think the small changes, so literally like having a metal straw instead of a plastic straw, turning the lights off, little things like that, turning the tap off, why brushing teeth, that kind of thing. People say it's not about the little things, it should be about the people in government, you're in charge of this legislation, you should be doing it. I used to believe that. I used to believe, it's the big people with the big brains, the big power that do this. And then I kind of, as I went through my degree and as I kind of learned and did my own reading around it, I kind of learned that actually it's not up to them. It's, if the consumer makes the difference, makes that change, the businesses will have to listen. If businesses and corporate kind of levels listen to that, then government have to listen to that. They have to listen to the people there who they represent. And I think that's the only way you can do it, is by making those small changes and investing as much as you can to do as much as you can. So to me, a sustainable society is just a society that looks forward, not kind of pointing fingers. I think at the moment a society, especially in the UK, has got very good at saying, well, we actually only admit this, but China, if you look at China and the US, and I think that's, climate change and effects of it, like, natural disasters or famine, that kind of thing, they don't say, oh, you're from the UK, you don't admit that much, so I'm not going to hurt you. That's not the way it works, So I think we need to stop being like, oh, the USA does this, oh, well, North Africa does this. I think we need to stop being like we do. We need to say, right, okay, so how are we going to look forward, how are we going to maintain what we have now for future generations? And I think that's all it is. It's nothing big, it's nothing complicated, it's not laws, it's not new products, it is just a society that are willing to say, okay, we are, let's move forward and let's look to the future, and that's what I think. But I feel like I get more cynical just because I think more and more I kind of think, oh yeah, that's amazing, like I hear about this new technology, like for example there's this new pump that can go in the ocean and it's carbon negative, which means that it actually takes in more carbon than it puts out. And you think, this is an amazing invention, amazing product, and the reason it hasn't taken off yet is because no business will invest in it. And you think, well hold on a minute, you know, how much are we pumping into kind of like the fashion industry and all that kind of thing, and you think, well, you know, it's not at the front of people's minds. It's not, you know, economics and finance will always take precedence over the environment, and that's why I think has made me just be a bit more cynical about the whole thing. And that's why I think it's not the big guys and harder anymore. I think it's down to the consumer and the person. And, you know. So I'm very limited. So I've striked myself, and at the start I was like, yeah, I'm doing this in the environment. Then I kind of saw how destructive it can be and how you become the enemy. And when I was going for my job, so I work for a beef production company, which a lot of people will be like, hold on a minute, beef in the environment. And you, yeah, well. And I had a chat with my dad, who's very clued up on this sort of thing, and he works in the credit card industry, and he's the environment side of that. And he said, you know, I've been with Greenpeace, I've protested, he said, I've chained myself to trees, and he was like, but all you're doing is raising a negative profile for the environment. And he was like, you're much better off doing what I did, and that's what you do. And then he was like, well, I fought from the inside out. So he went into corporations, he got his degree, he went in, and he's making small changes from the inside of the company. And by being on the inside of the company, people listen to you, which is the irony. That people will, you know, if you wear a suit, people will listen to you, which is the sucky thing. But yeah, so he kind of said, you know, you can be one or two people, and I think kind of the latter is the way forward, just because, you know, as I said, you don't see people listen to you.
Yeah, well, yeah. What do you want me to sit, stand?
Sit's fine, no?
Okay.
You're in focus. Okay. The first question is, how do you think about climate change?
How do I think about climate change? Do you think it exists?
Whatever comes to mind.
I suppose the problem for most people is that it's not immediately apparent that it exists, and there's so much information being chucked at you from both sides that you don't know. I believe that it's certainly affecting the climate. Whether it's catastrophic as being told about, I don't know. Yeah, that's what I think.
How much is it a priority in your life?
Well, financially it's a priority because on my own I tend not to light the fire. I'm not in here an awful lot, and so if I'm coming in and out at night, I'll just put a jumper on rather than. So it affects me financially.
How was climate change talked about when you were younger?
It wasn't.
Right. Like not at all?
Not at all. It wasn't even on the radar. That's before 1956. So I think it's probably not talked about in India. It's probably not talked about in any third world country. We're lucky enough to be in a place where we can worry about that level of concern. If you're struggling to get food to eat, climate change is nothing anywhere.
What would you say to the young strikers of today?
Become politicians. You know, put your energies into that. Get in a position where you can change things.
You think that's the best?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the people that can make these big changes are the government. We can't, and I can't make a big decision here. If you want to have a more efficient power station or more electric cars or a better infrastructure to feed the cars or whatever, the government do it. So you get into Parliament, you get in there.
Why do you think not much has happened so far in terms of climate change?
And people in Parliament. People don't care enough about it. It's not important enough. And the only people who can make a big difference is the government. You know, if climate change, I don't know, even things like carrier bags, if the government said tomorrow, no plastic bags, only paper, job done. It's done. It's a government decision.
But wouldn't you say also that, like, because the government goes off what they hope the people want, if the people vocalise what they want more, then that would therefore impact politics?
Yeah, but it does, but it's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Because for most people, having an electric car at the moment is impossible. It's just too much money for the average person, and then they can't charge it anyway. So the decisions are made at government level, and because they're career politicians, they're frightened to make a decision which will affect their career.
I've been trying very hard for some years now to carry on being hopeful. And that gets harder and harder, I have to confess. But I think if we let ourselves get too dark about it, then there's a risk of everybody just getting very depressed about the situation, and that could actually stop action, make people feel, if people feel hopeless about things, then they might not necessarily think it's worth doing anything or that there's any point in doing anything. And I think that's something to guard against. But I mean, I have been feeling more hopeful since the Greta Thunberg actions and how they've sort of flowed into our culture here. Not really. I've always felt that it was something that needs to be addressed urgently. But I do think that as a generation, my generation, we took our eye off the ball for quite a long time. And I think, I mean, there were other things that required action, if you like. A lot of my friends became involved in peace protests and that kind of thing. Maybe there could have been more action. I mean, a lot of us were involved with Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and organisations like that. Whereas the work that was being done by those organisations was very, very valuable. It wasn't necessarily getting people talking about the environment, and I think that's where we made some mistakes in being in a bit of a silo, in a bit of a bubble, rather than ensuring that everybody understood our perception of what the consequences would be if we didn't address problems that were already manifesting back in the 1970s. Well, we had the hole in the ozone layer. And acid rain, in a way, I think they were partly the reason why we took our eye off the ball, because we fixed the hole in the ozone layer. It became smaller. They stopped putting CFCs. I say they, industry took notice and stopped putting CFCs in aerosols and fridges and things like that, and therefore the problem improved. And similarly with acid rain, I think that they were very careful about, I think it was sulphur emissions at the time, so the effects of acid rain on buildings and so on appeared to improve. Whether it was just because they decided to wash buildings more, I don't know, but we didn't hear so much about acid rain. So I think maybe back then, in the 1970s and 80s, we thought that problems were being dealt with. There was a lot of talk about the greenhouse effect, though, and that wasn't just linked with the hole in the ozone layer. I know that there was a lot of talk about CO2 emissions even back in the 70s when I was in my teens and 20s. And global warming as well was talked about quite a lot, but a lot of people also talked about a new ice age, and this was in the press quite a lot. That they looked at statistics, and some scientists thought that the world was going to get colder and we were going into a new ice age. And I think that started this debate between, is it global warming, or are we going into an ice age? Is it caused by people? Or is it just like it was back in the 14th century when the Thames froze over and they all used to ice skate? Is it just natural rhythms that are taking place here? And I think that debate was absolutely huge, and I think it's that debate that partly put a stop to a lot of the direct activity that was going on. I think is great. I really do. I think that calling attention and dealing with climate change is far and away much more important than the kind of education that they're delivering in schools these days, and that taking those actions and discussing those issues and seeing how those actions can progress into more sustainable activity is an education in itself.
Changed a lot in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I'm born in the late 1950s, and I'm from a very industrial region, the rural district with coal mines and heavy industries. And in this time, in the 1960s, it was no topic at all, climate change. But that changes in the 90s, changed in the 1970s and 1980s when the nuclear power movement rose.
Okay.
And the discussion to climate change, to mankind climate change, appeared in the early noughties, I think. And so it was a long way for me to realize that climate change is a real threat. It changed, yes. Nowadays I'm not hopeless what we will do against climate change. There were a lot of influences from the environmental movement and protests, and I think mankind will be able to change his policy and his behavior in the direction of a good solution.
Okay.
Let me tell you an example, a little story. When my mother did the laundry, she can't hang it outside for the tiny little dust all in the air. It is more the topic of the issue of air pollution, which was very severe in that time. And famous German politician said in the 60s, the sky above the river Ruhr must turn blue again. And this changed a little bit the policy, and from that on, and the nuclear, anti-nuclear protests in the 1970s, has a big influence on my thinking about climate and climate change. No.
No?
No, I'm too old to go down to the street and protest. And it's perhaps a different view from me to this action. I think the protests were very important to change the public opinion, but on the other side, I think in Germany and perhaps in the whole European Union, we are on a good way in this question of climate change. In the last week, I think, the government has introduced a climate change program with a reduction of the carbon footprint and with COU pricing and all these things. And for this, I think there is a lot to do, but in Germany we have already started. I sympathize with these protesters, and they on the way to tackle a major global problem. It's a global challenge to fight against climate change. I think we are on the we are starting now, and when you intend to tackle climate change, they are not easy. That will not be easy to change our behavior. It will have consequence in the public wealth and in the amount of money which earns everyone. And for this, it's really an onerous task for the politicians who wants to be re-elected to begin and to start measures in this field. And for this, I think it's a real, in the end, political problem.
But man, on his island, Earth, has no nearby mainland to swim to when population pressures get too much. And those pressures are rising.
If the present population growth in the world continues for the next 40 years, more people will be added to the Earth's population in the next 40 years than have existed in the whole of history up to this point in time. Are too poor to afford food, well then food isn't produced. It takes 10 kilograms of corn or wheat to produce 1 kilogram of cattle or beef, and 5 kilograms to produce 1 kilogram of pork, and 3 kilograms of grain to produce 1 kilogram of chicken.
We now take from the Earth in a year took 400,000 years for nature to lay down.
Some biologists at least feel that deforestation is putting as much CO2 in the air as burning of fossil fuels.
Life, which has brought affluence in this century to a third of humanity, now threatens the demise of all. Too many people demanding too much, destroy the Earth and trying to get what they want.
Climate change is very important to me because it dictates the economy, it dictates my life. If, like in a short-term perspective, climate change, if it's hotter in summer, that's great, but if it's colder in winter, that's really annoying. Like, so there's those kind of insignificant effects, but if in 50 years, like, I can't go to the Maldives or somewhere like that because it's flooded, it doesn't exist anymore, or a country has mass, I need to give a lot of money away. This quite sounds selfish, but if a country's had like a mass drought or a famine because it's got a lot hotter, that's an issue. Or if there's wars in Africa because deserts have expanded and there's less land for people to live on, that's important to me. Hopeless. I watched a few videos and I read a few articles about it. There's nothing we can really do realistically. Even if we were to cease all CO2 emissions right now, and we replanted every tree that's ever been cut down, got rid of all cities and towns, it would still be too late to fix anything. That's what the video said anyway. You have carbon credits, and you can trade with. You can now make like climate change a currency. ice caps, how are you going to stop them from melting right now? You can't just make the world colder, can you? There are countries in the world, such as China and India, who don't, I don't want to say they don't care, but their output suggests that they don't care, and they'll keep producing things despite climate change and how they think about it, especially with China. So if all the other countries are slowing down their output, China's going to see this, or any other country see this. Oh, this is an opportunity for us to increase ours, so we can overtake other countries. So it's an opportune moment, and they'll seize it. Citizens, realistically, because I work for quite a big firm, the amount of stuff we waste. It's the businesses and governments. If you've got a big business who they go to another country because it makes costs cheaper, so they can charge a lower cost for their prices and make more profit. They will do that. Some businesses will do that, and that actually increases climate change, and that's their fault. They're producing more outputs, which is not necessarily good for the environment, but it's good for their business. They are impacting the environment. They're impacting it a lot more than people are. I'm not saying that if all citizens, civilians and people like that, all cut down, that wouldn't have an effect. It would have a much bigger effect if they had it. Governments, I already talked about China, India and these big producers. They also need to cut down huge time. They need to listen to UN meetings about climate change and such, and they need to do something about it. I think I see a lot of blame on the individual, like, oh, if you only boil the amount of water that you need for your cup of tea instead of just boiling the whole kettle, whereas there are these firms just getting away with a lot. Yes, we did in geography, we talked about climate change, how ecosystems have changed and how it's going to negatively impact us. I remember doing, we did Africa, so we did Nigeria, and like how the Sahara, which is what it's called, the bit is turning into the desert, and methods to stop that, and it's impacting farmers and causing more famines. In economics, we talked about carbon credits, so how you can trade, each country has a set amount of carbon credits, and you can trade each of your outputs of carbon with other countries, so there's like a cap on how much each country produces.
No, literally, no. I don't think I was being taught anything. I don't think so. I mean, I don't know about like geography. I was going to say like sea levels are rising, but that's not. Yeah, no, I don't think anybody's educated enough on it to be able to. I don't think we talk really about anything in like to do with politics or like the world. No, I guess. Pretty hopeless at this point. Well, I want to be hopeful, but it's difficult because it seems that at the moment not that much is being done about it. I think also in this blame culture that we live in, like everyone's just blaming other people and not, taking action and doing things themselves. Yeah, that's right. Because collectively, if you kind of take your own responsibility for it, then you're more likely to sort of make change happen, I suppose. Yeah. Well, there was a strike. There was a strike recently, just outside the school. Yeah. And there was quite a few people also that went outside as well from school. And it's nice to see young people as like the next generation, so it's important that we're aware of what's going on. I'd say everybody, because everybody's contributed to the ways of the world today. I think everyone could do, well, most people could do something that would reduce climate change. Yeah, and I feel like also the common attitude is that like one person changing something about their life won't make a big difference, but if you have that mentality, then there never is going to be any sort of positive change. I think also like on a larger scale, it probably does have more effects, like a big business doing things rather than just one person doing. Everyone needs to contribute in order for it to. So you've still got people not trying to change things, then it's still kind of.
about children, but I really would love to have children later. Like a couple of years, but many years. But I'm afraid that I can't have children, that I won't be wanting to have children anymore because of the bad world. No, because I don't want to give birth to a child in a world like this, which is like will fall apart.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But also, I think something that I hear is that humans just tend to think about themselves, and I think what most people strive for is to save humanity or something. But we seem to forget to save other species as well, and to save like the whole planet and not just humanity.
I mean, if it would be a trend, it would be a good trend, because doing something for the climate is always good, and a trend is reaching many people. So, I mean, if the Whisker Girls want to save the turtles, I'm down for that, you know, like...
And also, I think once the trend would have started or has started, then nobody would get off the trend, because once you're in that climate change view or in that pro-climate change view, then you don't really change your mind. So even if it started as a trend, I think now it will be a change of people. I guess I'm more fearful, or I think it's sort of inevitable, because if you look at like other regions than Berlin, then you see that they're not really as pro-climate than Berlin is, because I think that Berlin is like a small bubble where people are actually quite sustainable thinking, or sustainable thinking. And also the government recently introduced a new climate package, and that was so like, so I think it's hard to be hopeful, because it's not really reaching the government, or I hope it will.
While I'm in this bubble of Fridays for Future community, I'm very hopeful, because it seems like everybody is on the streets fighting for or against climate change, but when you're like stepping out of the bubble and looking over whole Germany, you can see how many people don't even know about Fridays for Future and don't even think about it. And actually, we're not that many people. We are many people in Berlin, but when you see the whole, we are not enough. Yeah, in elementary school, we were also taught about recycling and why taking the bike is better than going by car to school, and that walking is good. We were planting plants, but it was never that we were never taught about climate change. We were just taught that it's good to do that. But I think children in elementary school will not really understand what is climate change, and I think it's a good way to kind of show them that nature is important by telling them that you should maybe take more sustainable opportunities.
I think it's all of them.
Yeah.
I think of course it's businesses that produce like harmful things for the environment, or they don't act sustainably, but like the citizens are the ones that buy these products or consume these things that are harmful for the environment, and also the government doesn't really restrict on any of these areas or something, or not enough, as we've seen in the new climate package of our government. Yeah, but I think because we are the ones who could actually change something, like the day-to-day citizens, they could actually not buy these products or act sustainably. I think it is mostly the day-to-day citizens, because they are the ones that could actually do something themselves, unless, or in spite of, or instead of telling others what to do by telling the government to do it.
I totally agree on that. It's the citizens, it's the inhabitants of Germany who are living in a little bubble and eating meat every day, and we don't want to change. We're like, oh, the government is bad, they are doing this to us, but then they are having the habits of eating meat every day. And yeah, I think if the majority of Germany of German inhabitants would change, then it really would make a big impact.
I think quite a lot of people in our school are striking. I don't know how many, but it feels like a very lot of people. But yeah, I think you're striking more often than I do.
Yeah, I'm also striking. There was one situation when Lydia was there. And Lydia and I were going to the global strike on the 20th, and there were thousands of very, very, very young people, like 12 years old, even in elementary school, and they had like big banners, and it was so cute because they're so little and the banners are so big. And I mean, I don't know them, but there were so many. There were like people going to a concert, floating to the stadium, to the concert hall, and from our school, there are many people striking, so I'm very happy about that. But our school is not that happy. I think they are not very happy about it. They are like not giving us the permission to go. So it's a problem because
I think it's a wonderful thing that still a lot of people go from our school, although we're not allowed to actually.
And it's not that we are just going out of school on Fridays because we don't want to have school. We are now in the 11th grade and in the 12th grade, and it's shit when you miss school. And I'm really, it's hard to decide whether I go to the strike or whether I will go to school, because it's not that easy anymore. So it's a really, really big step to decide that you will miss the classes on Friday.
This is a book of science, and in English we collected them when Benedict lived with me.
Oh, yeah.
That's all water under the bridge.
Oh, yeah, different like English phrases. Yeah.
The last one was I'd rather be dead in the ditch by Boris Johnson. He said that. It has changed because now it's a big topic. Hi.
Brauchst du eine Karte?
Kaffee hätte ich gerne.
Kaffee, klein oder groß?
Klein.
Ja.
Yeah, it did change.
Okay.
It has become a big topic since 2 or 3 years, I think. And I learned about it at school, but it was not such a major topic. So in the last years I spent more time thinking about it. Like 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I didn't thought so much about flying somewhere or not. Yes, it did, definitely. Especially in the last years. So I'm kind of typical for my generation, I think. We haven't thought about that much until 2015 or 16. Even though we knew about the problem and we learned about the issue a lot. But it was not so present in everyday life, I would say. It's not sustainable, because the carbon footprint per person is quite high, a lot higher than in China or other countries. Our economy is still based on engines, combustion engines, so it's not sustainable, even if we made a lot of progress in the last years. If you look at the energy system and the sustainable production of electricity, that was raised quite a lot in the last years, and we put a lot of effort in it and money. How much priority? that's not the most important thing.
Yeah.
So first work, then family, third climate change. No, that's not like this. I didn't change my lifestyle. I still fly in Europe. I try not to consume so much. So buy second use, is it?
Second hand.
Second hand, yeah. Or I've got no car, but I never had a car, so I didn't make any decisions because of climate change so far.
But you're always, Ben's always saying that you're finding things from the streets and stuff.
Oh,
like
yeah.
that pan and stuff.
I love it. When I go for a walk, I often see things I could use, like books or furniture or wood.
That's quite cool.
Yeah. Makes me satisfied. That's hard to say. They've got a climate package, they call it. So there are a few actions they want to make in the next years. It was quite recently they signed it. But a lot of people say it's too little. It's not ambitious. Yeah, it's not ambitious enough because they still want the economy to sell cars. And just do a little bit. It's more like that they can show here we do something, but it's not tackling the real problems. People say behind it.
Yeah,
they
yeah,
do it
yeah.
because there is pressure from the streets, from the Fridays for future demonstrations.
They don't actually mean it.
They want to still be elected, and so they signed this package and said, "Oh, that's what we did, so please be happy now as citizens." Yeah. I think the government has to make laws because you can't rely on people's smartness to save the planet. It's in human nature to think of themselves first and to their first of their own pleasure and then for the society, so it needs the government to make laws and rules. Yeah, the sustainable lifestyle has to change, so it's not the focus on the not doing things but doing other things, to combine the pleasure with sustainability and lifestyle. Like finding things on the street and not spending money and not going on holiday to, let's say, Mallorca or Ibiza. So that's the most important thing, I think, to combine sustainability and joy. Yeah, trust the scientists and it will, for sure, become worse and worse. I don't think that this topic will be on that high level so long as it is now. Not because there is no impact of climate change, because the people get used to the topic and get rid of the topic and say, "Oh, I don't want to hear about it anymore." Things. So, yeah, the topic won't be on the first priority as it is now, I would say, unless there is a real impact on people's life in Germany, like flooding or another summer like last year, which was very hot here. Yeah, the world in 30 years will be completely different, I think, because of climate change. It's my perspective. So I trust the scientists. Oh, I've got another thing.
Yeah.
So we learned about climate change at school. I thought about it when you sent me the questions, but it was called, or they called it, Treibhauseffekt, which is greenhouse effect. Like not sure when I heard the word climate change the first time, but I remember I got a book when I went to school. We had a religious thing in the 3rd grade, which is called Communion. You heard about it?
Communion?
Yeah.
Communion?
The Catholics do it. And we got presents, and I got a book of the outcome of the gathering of the United Nations in '92 in Rio, Brazil, and the sustainability and climate change was a big topic at that time there. So people know quite.
Responsible for as much greenhouse gases as all direct emissions from transport combined, and that's due to the inherent inefficiencies within animal agriculture itself. So making animal products kind of requires feed, giving feed to animals, which is then converted to make a meat or egg-based product at a really low rate of efficiency. So on average about 12 of 100 calories are retained within an animal, whereas the remaining 88 is burned by the animal's respiratory processes, for example, like regular movements, sensors, biological processes, that kind of thing. So it's important to note that it's not possible for us to maintain anywhere near the existing animal protein production through grazing systems without causing deforestation and further contributing to the already high levels of emissions produced by animal agriculture. So what this therefore suggests is that it would be more efficient and equitable to enable a food system that grows crops derived for human consumption instead of growing food for livestock. This is also supported by research from Oxford University which concluded that you can reduce your individual carbon footprint by up to 50% if you are vegan, so it's pretty substantial. Yeah, so definitely the number of vegans has stumbling over my words. The number of vegans has quadrupled between 2014 and 2019, which with there now being an estimate of around 600,000 vegans in the UK. Recent research from Sainsbury's has also concluded that vegetarians and vegans look set to make up under half of the British population by 2025, with flexitarians under half of all UK consumers. So yeah, there's strong evidence to suggest that it's becoming significantly more mainstream. Yeah, so following the declaration of climate emergency, more and more people are definitely now more receptive to the conversation surrounding veganism, and people are a lot more mindful of their consumption. So market trend reports from Mintel, for example, have concluded that sales in the meat-free market are set to increase by 44% over the next 5 years. So what this emphasises is that our existing food system is geared towards the production of food that people don't actually want to consume and is bad for the environment. Yeah, definitely. So in light of the climate emergency, there's been a huge body of scientific evidence that backs this up as well, and urges this shift for planetary health. So for example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change directly states, in general, a dietary pattern that is higher in plant-based foods such as vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and lower in animal-based food is more health promoting associated with lower environmental impact, as well as the Committee on Climate Change, who have stated that changes in people's diets, if this leads to reduced UK production of products such as beef, lamb and milk, could have some significant impact on emissions. I think it's important for us to note that the UK is pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and animal agriculture currently accounts for 10% of the UK's total emissions. So it's therefore imperative that we recognise the role of animal agriculture for us to tackle the climate crisis. Well, our formal definition of veganism is a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing or any other purpose. So the one thing that all vegans have in common is a plant-based diet that avoids all animal foods such as dairy, meat, fish, shellfish, eggs and honey, for health and environmental purposes, for example, but we also avoid animal-derived materials, products tested on animals, and places that use animals for entertainment, with compassion being a key reason for that. A vegan diet's really diverse, so it comprises of all kinds of fruits and vegetables. You've got nuts, grains, seeds, beans and legumes, so you can prepare an endless number of combinations of things to ensure that you're not bored. So you can make like curries, cakes, pastries, all your favourite foods. They're all suitable for a vegan diet if you use plant-based alternatives, and there's so many different foods on the market now that I think it's important to note that the food system is complex and nuanced, and of course different types of farming have different impacts. There's a lot of discussion around the benefits of having grass-fed livestock, for example, as a climate-friendly method of farming. Where Tara Garnett from the Food Climate Research Network, for example, has concluded that this method is flawed. The carbon sequestered is outweighed by the methane produced by a significant margin. So one reason for this is that grass is high in fibre, and when digested would still generate a large amount of the greenhouse gas. So there is a lot of evidence that suggests that a vegan food system is the most sustainable. There's no harm in trying, right? As part of our Place of the Planet campaign, we have a 7-day plant-based pledge where we sort of email you tips, facts and recipes to make things as easy and motivational as possible. And we often get feedback from people who've taken part in the challenge who say that they stuck with the vegan diet right after and that they found it significantly easier than they imagined. So that's nothing to give. It's a really good question, and I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that our farmers do a lot to support biodiversity. They protect our land and they put food on our plates, but all we're suggesting is that the food they produce is different. Our Very Green campaign, for example, specifically gears towards policy changes that support a shift away from animal agriculture towards more sustainable forms of land management, for example, such as plant protein agriculture. And we highlight the benefits of pulses specifically as being a more nutritious and sustainable form of protein. Of course, it's imperative that any changes to our food and farming policy supports farmers in achieving equity, which is why one of our policy recommendations includes creating a protein aid scheme, whereby protein crops would be the focus of a new farm entry scheme, which supports farmers interested in environmental and ethical benefits of farming. We're also calling for farming policy to have a more proactive decision-making process, so a more wider range of stakeholders would be consulted to prevent one particular view of the farming industry that sort of protects existing interests from dominating that discourse, basically. And we also acknowledge, as a part of that not all land is suitable for growing pulses, so we need to look into pioneering forms of agroforestry, such as rewilding and reforesting. Much of our land would naturally be ancient woodland, but currently 87% of the UK is unwooded. So these rare pieces of land which have been raised and contain unusual biodiversity, mixes can be retained by free-living animals, or animals which are supported for conservation purposes.